Chrysalis, a story by user BeaverFur. Chapter 4. I entered the living room carrying the blanket on my right arm. It was a woolen, hand-knitted patchwork of green, brown, and blue colors. It hung from my arm, weighing it down, skimming right over the wooden boarded floor, but without ever dragging on it. I walked slowly, deliberately. There was a certain ritualistic approach to my movements. There had to be. The living room was lit in the orange glow coming through its single window, bathed in the colors of a Sunday afternoon, the dying of the day casting long shadows across the floor, across the table and couch. I paused briefly right in front of the brown couch, then turned on my feet and sat on it, placing the blanket on the seat next to me. Slowly, I leaned sideways and rested my head on the armrest. After a beat, I raised my legs and placed them on the couch, too. I lay there, my body sprawled across the 3 seats. Of course, the piece of furniture wasn't as long as a bed, so I had to keep my knees somewhat bent to fit in it. The posture created a bit of strain in the artificial muscular tissue that covered my legs, but it was supposed to do that. It was supposed to be ever so slightly uncomfortable, but not unpleasant enough that I would need to move and change posture. With a precise motion, I unfolded the blanket and covered my body with it, from the legs and up to my chest. I doubted for a moment whether to place my arms over or under the blanket, unsure as to which was the correct way to go about it, the perfect resting posture. Eventually, I left them uncovered. The TV in front of the couch was turned on, broadcasting some old show I hadn't watched before. The images having that noisy grain that dated them to sometime during the 80s. Of course, it's not that I didn't know the name of the show, or its length, the actual date of airing of each of its 28 episodes. The one now playing on TV was the 6th. The name and date of birth of each of its leading actors, and where I had found the tapes, a television archive building in what had been the city of Atlanta, one that I had completely digitized before leaving Earth. But I tried to shy away from that knowledge, pretending I didn't know all that, pretending I had just turned on the TV and this was what happened to be on it. It wasn't working. Not fully. But it was as close as I dared going, short of intentionally deleting that knowledge from my databanks. Had I had eyelids, I would have them half closed by now, but the body I was controlling was just another one of my robotic soldiers, and I hadn't designed them with this purpose in mind. I could have turned off its 2 cameras, but it just wouldn't have felt the same, so I simply adjusted their focus until the image I got from them was slightly blurred. It would have to do. All of this was, of course, a crude mockery, a doomed attempt at recapturing a memory, at feeling again that sense of warmth, of calmness that came with spending a Sunday afternoon lying on the sofa, balancing in that narrow sweet spot between awareness and sleep. Except things were somewhat off. The room felt different somehow, though I couldn't quite put my finger on what was wrong. Was the ceiling just a bit too tall or too short? How many inches had the TV screen had? How many feet had separated it from the couch? It felt as if someone had run through my stuff and put everything out of place. I could tell things were wrong, but the memories weren't precise enough, clear enough, as to know how to fix those same mistakes. I knew the couch's fabric had had some sort of faded pattern, but I couldn't for the life of me recall what it had looked like. But the most glaring hole in the memory was the other presence that had been there with me. I knew I hadn't been alone when resting like this, drifting off to sleep. Someone had sat with me on the same couch. I recalled jokes. I recalled someone massaging my legs. And yet I couldn't recall their face, their looks, who they had been. I knew that person had been important, but not why. This, the whole experience, was an exercise in frustration. in trying to reach at something that was always moving away, that slipped through my fingers the moment I thought I had a grasp on it. But it was important that I kept trying. It grated on me that the most vital memories, the ones tying me back to humanity, were also the most blurred ones, the most imprecise, the most filled with gaps. All the while, I could construct a perfect replica of a Zunvirian laser projector, down to the identifying serial codes in each electronic board. I was constructing them at that very moment, in fact. 416 of them to join my other 2,379 projectors. I had already installed in drones and crafts across my fleet. I had been busy. Even as I lay on the sofa purposefully not watching the TV, my awareness kept working on several simultaneous levels. I could see the outside of the living room, a plywood construction I had erected inside one of the smaller storage areas in my main body. I could see the space surrounding me, my extended panels bathed by the faint orange light of the twin stars at the center of the lumen system. I was aware of the more than 7 million machines that now composed my swarm. They were distributed across 3 stellar systems under my control, most of the drones tasked with different kinds of resource extraction. Minerals, radioactive materials, gases, water, all the work, the extraction, transportation, refining, and construction of new units controlled by the central servers in my main body, instantaneously transmitting commands both through the EM spectrum and via my new quantum-entangled relays. I had become a nation of a single mind. Paradoxically, I had the Zunvir Republic to thank for my exponential growth. It was the fusion plants of their own design that satisfied the increasing energy appetite of the swarm. It was their communication devices and optimized processing algorithms that allowed my brain to coordinate so many machines. It was their warp engines that had enabled me to expand beyond Earth's solar system. And more importantly, it was their past actions, their attack on Earth, that still fueled my determination. They had been aggressive at first, sending their warship squadrons after me. But they hadn't put up a strong enough front, maybe not considering me an important threat, so it hadn't been hard to come out ahead. Then they wised up, sending a strong and coordinated attack force to face me. Had they done that at the beginning, they could have won. But by the time they had reacted, I was already strong enough to stomp on their forces. After that, the Zunvirians had shifted to a defensive stance, no doubt grouping around their nearest colony world. It would fall on me to start the next confrontation. All around me, my attack swarm gathered, more than 400,000 offensive drones and assault soldiers. There were so many of them that they looked like a moving fluid. The machines danced and flowed in tight fractal formations, following complex patterns that weaved them together without ever crashing into each other. They enveloped me like a living metallic blanket, like some sort of twisted mirror of what was happening inside the plywood room. There were so many of them that it was impossible for me to stuff them into my main body anymore. Transportation and not manufacturing now marked the limits of my attack strength, so I had resorted to building support carrier ships. At roughly 2 kilometers long each, the support ships featured a miniaturized version of my own body design, with compartments for carrying drones and soldiers, but also assembly factories, raw material for storage areas, shield projectors, power plants, laser weaponry, and warp drives. The only thing missing was a mind of their own. Just like the drones themselves, the support ships were under my direct control, an extension of myself rather than separate entities. That was another of the boundaries, another line I wasn't willing to cross. I wouldn't give self-awareness to what I intended to use as a mere weapon of war. Like the drones, the support ships were disposable too. Which meant I couldn't just send my swarm to attack while I stayed put, behind, safe within my controlled territories. Even the quantum relays weren't perfect. Their bandwidth was limited, and if I tried to directly control the complex interwoven movements of hundreds of thousands of drones through them, there would be several seconds of delay before my orders reached their recipients, a delay that could cost me a battle. No. I would need to be on the front lines directing the machine's movements with precision, risking my own body. I guess I could have built backup servers in my stellar systems, though. Some sort of failsafe, a clone of my mind that would persist even if my main body was destroyed. It would be the smart thing to do. Optimal. But I didn't like it. The idea of my consciousness being some fluid thing, the idea of losing contact by mistake and coming back to find out another me had taken over. Stupid? Perhaps. I knew I was putting obstacles in my own way, deliberately falling short of my full potential. But I felt I needed this, these anchors, to prevent me from going down the ever-dangerous slope. Vengeance was important, but so was remaining human, not losing myself, because as long as I did, as long as I could keep me from becoming something else, then humanity itself would exist with me. There would still be a faint glimmer of hope. As long as I was human, then we wouldn't be extinct. So I couldn't afford to be consumed, to turn into a mindless weapon of mass destruction. That didn't mean I planned to die anytime soon, though. I had upgraded my body, improved its armor with the new material techniques I had developed, installed shield projectors based on Zunvirian designs, and a warp drive that was currently charging for the imminent faster-than-light trip. I commanded the support ships to spool their warp drives too. Turned out warp tunneling was dependent on mass. The bigger the object, the more power it required, and having to move a 27-kilometer-long object, the warp drive in my main body had some crazy energy requirements. It took my power plant several minutes to feed it before each activation. I felt nervous as I secured the last of my drones in their compartments, as I sent the orders that the factories and the other machines I was leaving behind would follow in my absence. It was always like this before a trip, but this time I knew it would be harder. I would be jumping straight into a battlefield, into an enemy trap. Steeling myself, I activated the warp drives. Right away I went blind and deaf, losing contact with the rest of my machines. I was now only aware of the drones within my own body. There was no way to communicate to the external world while in warp. It made me feel small. I was getting used to my expanded awareness, to being present across different stellar systems, to the most omniscient view I had over my domains. This, going back to the constraints of a single view, the physical limits of a single ship, felt almost like being caged. It made me feel anxious and vulnerable. The trip would only take about 20 minutes, but to the rest of the universe more than 3 days would have passed by the time I emerged back into normal space. I was all too aware of how defenseless my other machines would be during that time. They had their orders, and were autonomous enough as to not stop in their tracks, but I couldn't kid myself. Should the Zunvirians choose to attack my solar systems now, my drones would be an easy prey without myself to direct them. It spoke volumes of why the Zunvirian fleets moved the way they did, continuously making short warp jumps rather than long leaps. Like stones skipping on a lake's surface, always popping in and out of warp to avoid unpleasant surprises. Sadly, it just wasn't a viable strategy for me. With my massive vehicles, each FTL ticket was an expensive investment with a long setup. Making too many of them would be prohibitive. There just wasn't anything I could do other than wait, cross my fingers, and hope that I wouldn't come out of warp to find my home razed and burned, so to speak. So I waited, going over possible attack plans and flying patterns. Meanwhile, in the living room, I shifted my body to relieve the strain in my legs. Leaving warp was as sudden as entering it had been. One moment I was blind, the next I could see. Millions of machines popping into my awareness. Petabytes of information being downloaded into my brain as the pending logs finally reached me. My mind started working, shifting through the enormous pile of data, discarding irrelevant information and integrating the important bits into my memory banks. To my conscious mind, it felt as if I had never left. I had perfect recollection of everything that happened in my absence, all while I perfectly remembered being in warp, unable to communicate. It was yet another of the oddities of my strange new nature. I went through my memories of the last 3 days. A couple of factories had stopped production due to running out of input materials. 17 drones had been destroyed in a pipe collapse in the Centauri system. More than 4,000 others had landed in their respective home hangars after encountering maintenance problems of some kind or another. Nothing to worry about. I absent-mindedly sent the commands to deal with each of the situations and focused my attention on my immediate surroundings. The colony world floated at 80,000 kilometers away from me. A sphere of green, brown, and blue hues. Its bright, colorful tones contrasted with the pure black of space, making it stand out like a floating jewel. It was beautiful. It only served to make me angrier, that it was just like Earth had once looked, that the Zunvirians got to enjoy this safe, beautiful world even after having wrecked ours, that crimes didn't have any repercussions, that the universe, that life itself, kept going on in spite of our tragedy, that we had been forgotten. No, that wouldn't do. In orbit, right behind the planet and my own position, there was the Zunvirian fleet. With 13 battleships and their escorting vessels, it was the largest combined fleet I had ever faced so far. And they had indeed wised up. Their warships' groups were arrayed in a large arching formation, leaving tens of kilometers of empty space between each other. Making sure, I noticed, that I wouldn't be able to wrap them all in the thick of my swarm at the same time. The enemy started to react, turning their flanks towards me, but they hadn't opened fire yet. Holding formation, they showered me in messages, transmissions asking for a truce, for a negotiation. I gave those the same treatment that humanity's own pleas had been given. I weighed my options. Their plan, I realized, was both simple and hard to counter. If I tried to attack them all at the same time, my machines would be too dispersed to be effective. That meant I would need to work my way through their ships instead, one after the other. But focusing my strength on a single target would free the other enemies to flank me and shoot at both me and my drones from the safety of distance, using the greater range of their energy weapons. Could I win? Yes. Maybe. My own body was now protected by shields specifically designed to withstand laser fire, and even though the drones were vulnerable, at the end of the day I had the advantage of numbers. Of very large numbers. So probably I would have enough drones as to work through their entire fleet ship by ship and come out victorious. But the losses would be astonishing. Most, if not all, my machines would be destroyed in the process. My body would need repairs. I could win, but would that be a worthwhile victory? Or just a losing strategy? One that could make me weaker in the long run, unable to survive at some critical juncture in the future. I could just ignore their warships and dive in for the kill, send all my swarm to ravage the world they were tasked with protecting. They wouldn't be able to stop me. But then what? After I destroyed their world, I would still need to face off their warships. Running away wasn't an option given how long my warp drive took to charge, and I'd be put into a worse tactical position, having already committed my army to a ground attack. What other options were there? Sending a couple drones armed with nuclear warheads towards each of their ships? No, it would be obvious, and the machines would be shot down long before they could reach their targets. Using nuclear drones was a collaborative task. One craft delivered the payload while the rest provided cover, chaos, and decoys. But again, trying to do that simultaneously against all the enemy ships would disperse my swarm too thinly. It was self-defeating. So, yes, the Zunvirian strategy was simple, but hard to counter. We stood there for a few instants of standoff, facing each other, not talking on my part. No radio communications. 3 seconds later, I was joined by my 8 support ships, popping out into normal space by my side. Ah. Alright guys, that's going to do it for this one today. I hope you are having a good one. Thank you guys so much for listening. I think we are going to change some things up here soon. This will be the last Monday of the month, and then we start more Deathwilders. We start more Deathworlders next month, and yeah, that should be good. I think, though, the change is going to be that I record an entire episode all at once, like an entire chapter. Graygor will chop it into equal sections that make sense, and then I will release those on YouTube. But the main story that I have recorded all at once, I will make that a video by itself that will be private or members only or whatever the hell. I don't know what you would call it. Private, just for the people that I let watch it, basically. And those will come out quicker than the ones that are coming out on the channel publicly. So I'm going to try to get 3 of those out a month, 3 whole chapters for patrons, and then it will be 3 of the normal ones for everybody else. And that's just, trying to basically make this more effective, I guess. I don't know what you would call it. I'm just trying to get more stuff out. And Graygor keeps hounding me about making sure that I have content, and I'm trying really hard, but he won't let me leave my desk. And when I actually get the chance to do so, it's just really nice. And I go to a restaurant and eat food and drink wine, and that nice. So, me have good day, you have good day. We talk later? Okay. Love you. Bye, y'all. Like, comment, subscribe. Visit the Patreon. Lots of cool things happening.